Thanks for coming, everyone. My name's Jill Beebout, and as Vanya said, I farm with my at Bluegate Farm with my husband Sean Skian. We are a certified naturally grown produce farm primarily. We also raise honeybees and a few alpacas for our fiber business. Um, we raise about 6 acres of produce as part of our 40 acres that we steward of my family's land. And we have been here since April 1st of 2005. And I'll flip it over to Rob.
Yeah, the mute button didn't want to go. Hi, I'm Rob Fox with the Genuine Fox Farm in Tripoli, Iowa. Going a little bit backwards from what Jill said, we started in the summer of 2004, and we're on a 15-acre farm, so it's a little bit smaller. At our peak, we had 5 to 6 acres of vegetables, and we also had a wide variety of poultry on our farm. And starting in about 2020, we started scaling back a little bit as I took a job off of the farm. I was the full-time employee, and Tammy was the part-time employee with an off-farm job. And that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of who we are and who's talking to you. And I think what I'll do is I'll just go to the first thing, and we're just going to go back and forth on some of these big pivots, big changes on our farms that made a huge difference in what we were doing, how we were doing it, and in fact, in some cases, whether our farm survived or not. I think that's probably not overstating it, Jill. Um, so one of the things that I wanted to start with was just a big change in our farm infrastructure. In 2010, our farm was actually the first farm for a PFI high tunnel build day. It was actually a 2 day event where people who were members of PFI joined and helped us build a high tunnel. It's a little bit like a Tom Sawyer Day, where you get everybody to come and whitewash your fence for you. But the point is high tunnels were fairly new, and this was the first year that EQIP funding was available for high tunnels, and we were part of that program, and that was the motivation for PFI wanting to do the field day. But I think the thing that's really important here is we put up this high tunnel. We had no covered ground as far as high tunnel or greenhouses at that time. And our farm is very flat. And when it rains, the rain doesn't necessarily go anywhere. And we had a couple of years at this time where the rains just didn't want to stop. And 2010 was one of those years. And so we were watching at this time during this particular year, all of our crops were dying in the field. We had broccoli rotting in the field, and this was what our farm looked like to us in June of 2010. We were really thinking that we were failures, and we were really believing that this was about the end of our farm in 2010. And what prevented us from actually quitting was the fact that we had committed to the EQIP funding, to purchasing this high tunnel, to putting the high tunnel up with the PFI field day. And we decided we needed to go through with that. And of course, if you're going to make that kind of a major change, you probably should also commit yourself to continuing afterwards. The ironic thing of it is if you look at the picture, look at the nice, beautiful blue sky and the sunshine and very few clouds. Right up until the day that the trucks drove up with the high tunnel supplies, we were getting rain and continuing to get rain, and everything was muddy and icky. But then as soon as we unloaded, the skies cleared and the rains cleared up. And once that high tunnel went up, we started going back to more normal rain patterns. So if you want to have a symbol or a sign from on high, there it was blue skies and sunshine. But the reality is what this high tunnel did for us is this gave us a place where we could grow, where we could control how much moisture was getting into the environment that we were growing. And so a combination of the fact that we honored a commitment and the fact that we were able to create an environment where we could grow, even if it was really wet. This was a huge, huge change for us. And probably I would say the main reason that I'm still talking as a farmer today. There are other really big reasons, but if this event had not occurred on our farm, if we had not taken, frankly, a very big risk and a very big change for our farm, I don't think we would have continued beyond this particular year. We would have just walked away and said, well, nice try, Rob and Tammy. Let's move on now. Jill, I think you've got a similar thing on infrastructure.
We do. Thanks, Rob. We also have high tunnels, and we started with our first one, our second year farming. So that was never a huge change for us. Probably our biggest infrastructure change started in 2011 with the building of this lovely packing barn. When we started, we were in a building that was approximately 16 by 16 feet that my family had used as a very rustic shed, basically. And we had all of our packing, all of our workspace, all of our storage space in this little 16 by 16 foot space. And we were maxed out in that space. And I should have said in my intro, our outlets for our produce have been since 2005 farmers market and CSA primarily. We do very small wholesale business. And having such a small workspace really limited how much we could grow. So in 2011, we started with this building, thanks to my dad, who is our benefactor and contractor, putting this building up. And it made all the difference in the world. This was a couple of years after that building went up. We were installing our barn quilt, but you can see on the side with the lawnmower, right behind that is our walk-in cooler. And that also was part of that huge improvement. The cooler went into operation in 2014. So it took us a little time to get everything built and then get the cooler on board. Until then, we used a 3-door reach-in cooler for everything we had. So moving into that walk-in, our walk-in is 10 by 14, so not a huge amount of floor space, but we use a lot of vertical space in there. And expanding into the new packing barn and having that walk-in cooler that we can use year-round. Currently, I have a heater running in it so that we do store in it year-round. But that really allowed us to improve the quality of our produce. We're able to really get things cooled down and store longer times. It allows us to deliver year-round. So we expanded our root crop business, and this year we were holding 3,000 pounds of potatoes in there, which we still have a lot of. So that allows us to expand that sales time and improve our quality. It allowed us to expand the size of our CSA because we had the space to spread out and actually have boxes be laid out and product laid out. So this building for us was probably the single largest physical change on our farm to our benefit, and just a huge improvement. I'll send it back to you, Rob.
Yeah, Jill, I was just curious, did you start taking down the old shed in like 2011?
We maybe the end of 2010, and
Yeah.
and we'll talk a little bit about the group that helped us do that. We did this in the least sensical way possible because we were still using that little old packing shed. We couldn't afford to take it down. We didn't have any other space. So we actually built this barn on top of that building as a shell over the top of it, and then had to take it down from inside when we broke the old building down. So a complicated process, but yes, that was about the right timeline.
It's interesting to note, and this might be something folks would be interesting to notice here, is that our big change for infrastructure came in about year 6, as did yours.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you financed this in particular, but in our case, we sold some things that we had so we could get some capital. We did not take a loan out at that time. How did you finance this thing?
Family angels.
Okay.
Family angels is how we finance this.
And that's sometimes, I mean, at year 6, sometimes it's hard to make a big change unless you take out a loan. And in both of our cases, we had opportunities or things that came with us as we moved to farming that we were able to turn into the capital we needed to make it. So that's something that I think people probably could see what we're doing and where it comes from. Let's look at the next one. And in fact, this one comes back to you.
Oh, good. This was probably the single greatest overall change in our farm when Sean and I came to the farm in 2005. We were both on farm full time, and that's really how our business was designed. I was the primary vegetable farmer. Sean handled, at that time, livestock, which is primarily our chicken flock, even though it shows alpacas here, and our hay operation, our honey operation. But starting in about 2010, that started to shift a little bit. And starting in 2012, we had a catastrophic health issue. Sean had a serious injury from a fall from working in the barn, in the new barn. And then shortly after, it was discovered that he had very serious cancer, and he was really sick. So 2012 was really the end. Early 2012 was really the end of him being on farm in any meaningful fashion as far as our business model goes. He spent most of that growing season in and out of the hospital. So we really went from a two-person, both decision-making and physical activity team to a single person. And because it was an emergency situation, we didn't have the ability to plan and do that in a sensible and well thought out manner. So, sometimes those pivot points are forced on you, and you scramble and you deal, and that's really what 2012 was for us. And it was not a painless transition. Once we got past the emergency stage, we never went back to a two-person farm as far as and on an active basis. So we have continued to struggle a little bit, just trying to make that transition. And then eventually Sean got off farm employment, and then he was really not on the farm much at all. So that continued to be a struggle, and we're still dealing with some of the not necessarily repercussions of that, but how making those choices in a thoughtful manner rather than just a reactionary manner is something that we're still trying to get a handle on. So that's probably been our single biggest change.
Yeah, did you change a lot? I mean, it feels to me, just because I do know you and know some of how your farm has changed, it feels to me like the biggest impact was in how you had to try and locate people to work on your farm and how you had to treat them. Does that seem like a good summary, or?
Um, yes. Emotionally, it was probably a bigger transition for my brain, but yeah, we had already started employing off farm labor, but just on a very limited basis, and almost exclusively for our vegetable operation. The rest of the farm, we ended up contracting out our hay business. We backed out of the commercial honey production, and so those enterprises to some degree went by the wayside. We continued to do chickens for a number of years after that, but yeah, that really was the start of having to have a structured workforce rather than just casual labor.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that we actually have a parallel, but it's much at a different stage of the farm, because our change for labor was very dramatic, but it was just a few years ago, pretty much right when the pandemic started. I ended up taking a job with Pesticide Action Network as a communications associate. So doing more of my writing and speaking stuff for them. But if you work a full-time job off the farm, and for those of you who don't know, Tammy has always had a full-time job off the farm. So that was one of our strengths and our weaknesses on our farm, in that I was the full-time and person. Tammy was part-time and wanted to do more than she could. But then, of course, we had health insurance. So that provides us with the strength, and we had a constant income coming from her job. So that makes things very different for us than it was for Jill. But in 2020, suddenly we had no full-time individuals on the farm. And suddenly you can't do 5 acres of produce and 2 high tunnels and a CSA program and all the various poultry that we did. And in fact, just to echo what Jill was saying, this is still something we're also fighting right now. Because if you do several years of a 120 member CSA, and you're raising turkeys and you're raising chickens and all the stuff that you do, it takes a while to change your mindset for scale. Because when I want to plant, let's say I want to plant squash, well, I'm used to planting a whole 200 by 60-foot plot with squash and the pollinator plants that go with it. And so when I look at seeds to order, I'm thinking the same way I was thinking then, and want to buy as many seeds as I bought then and plant as many plants as I want then. But of course, when there's no full-time worker on the farm, and we started this in 2020 with the pandemic, so we couldn't easily hire somebody to fill my labor spot. We've been now working real hard to try and find the right scale. And I think that's really where our issue is. And one of the things that we've done is we dropped the CSA, because the CSA requires that you have a certain amount of produce with all the variety that it entails. So now we're basically we grow what we grow, and we offer it through an email. Whenever we have it, we send it to our loyal customers and say, do you want? They say yes or no. And then the rest we end up donating to the food bank or for the food pantry. Because when 2 people are bringing in an income, suddenly the farm's income isn't as critical to us as it once was. So I have the ability to do things a little differently. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, but I don't think we've figured this one out yet. I thought we'd do dropping an enterprise. This is a fun one. And this one's I can do this one quick, Jill. We did we did ducks for a few years. Actually, for 4 years, we raised ducks. So we liked the Muscovies for the meat, and we also raised some for eggs. Maybe we did this for 5 years, but now it's a moot point because we're not doing them anymore. The irony of this one is that the year before we stopped, Iowa Ingredient came out and filmed us in our duck operation. And the problem is in our area, since we're dedicated to local foods, we didn't have enough demand to sell all of the meat that we were producing or the eggs we were producing. And if you've ever worked with ducks, what you'll find is that getting them processed costs more, getting the ducklings costs more than say chickens or turkeys. So the expenses are higher. And so you've got a bigger investment in them as you raise them. And if you can't sell them once you process them, that becomes a little bit of a stress point. We did give it a few years because we wanted to try and see if we could develop the market. We weren't going to do a one and done. So we gave it a real shot. And I think we got pretty good with the ducks. We liked the ducks. They were fun. We just couldn't sell the ducks unless we went well outside of our current market area. And that was something we decided was beyond what we needed. So we decided this enterprise just wasn't going to stick with us. Even if we thought it was fun holding ducklings in our hands, it wasn't enough to make us just keep running out there and doing it all over again. So that's an example of something we dropped.
Our drop wasn't nearly as cute as Rob's ducklings. But we also dropped our poultry enterprise. We started keeping laying hens in 2006, so our second year on the farm, and started very small. And at the high point, we had about 180 to 200 laying hens at a time in rotational flocks on grass, obviously. And we found over doing laying hens for over a decade that it was ruling too much of our schedule. It, required that you're out there at a certain time of day, that you're out there at a certain time of night during the winter, because we did overwinter our birds. You were out there many times a day in the coldest temperatures. And it's hard to do that and run an active rest of a high maintenance produce operation. And as Sean was no longer on the farm, this had been one of his enterprises. So I was doing this on top of the vegetable operation, and washing eggs from 180 laying hens at the end of a long day of working produce. I was done. I was done. We were very concerned about, we had a great following for our eggs, and we didn't want our customers to lose that opportunity. So we were lucky to work with another farm. Another ranch. We were already working with Ebersol Cattle Company for some of our delivery pickups in one of our other programs. And so we were able to move our entire poultry operation to them, which was a huge boon for us, both no longer having laying hens and having our customers still able to get that resource. There are few things I regret less than having chickens and having that business available and stopping doing that business. And I think for us, whittling down an enterprise was much harder than accumulating new enterprises. Looking at our overall picture and deciding that we were finally at a maturity where we didn't have to say yes to everything. And no one really does, but I'm not very good at no. So finally coming to the point that operation or that enterprise had run its course for us was a great place to hit. So we stopped doing hens in early 2021. And again, don't regret it for a moment.
This is a good thing for us to reiterate strongly too, is that learning or thinking very hard about when is it time to stop doing something is actually, it might be the hardest thing to do, but it's probably one of the best things you can do. Is to, and I don't know about you, Jill, but for us, when we started thinking about, well, maybe we shouldn't do ducks, there was this tension of, well, we have some people who want this and we're pretty good at it. And I guess it's not so hard to do in the grand scheme of things. And I've already started and I got all the infrastructure in place. Is that kind of how you were feeling? I said, well, maybe we should just keep doing it because of all this?
Absolutely. It took us at least a year and a half to finally mentally reach the point where I felt like we could pull the plug on it.
Yeah, but still, I think in both cases, neither of us regrets making the choices we made. It was important that we did, and other things got better because we made these choices. We were able to spend time on other things that were either selling more, or we were better at, or we could sleep a little better. One of those things. They're all worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Jill, we got another one for you here.
We got another one. So this ties into that last subject a little bit in the changes in enterprise. This one was forced on us, a bit like our pivot point of labor. We had done farmers market since our first year on the farm, since 2005, and farmers market was a huge part of our business. It was almost all of our marketing, as well as a large amount of our income. And it never occurred to me that we wouldn't do farmers market. And then 2020 hit, and there wasn't a farmers market. We were at the downtown Des Moines farmers market, and that market was not available in 2020. We were lucky enough that, going back to our egg business, starting in about 2007, because we had eggs all winter long, we developed an email list and would do kind of like Rob was saying. We would, email out to those dedicated customers and meet them throughout the winter to deliver fresh eggs to them. as that continued, sometimes we had a little bit of produce on the side. And so we just added that to the egg sale availability. So we actually started to develop this backside of the calendar produce and egg business. And we always just referred to that as our egg sales. In 2017, we decided to brand that, and that became our veg email program. And luckily, we had that in place when that 2020 COVID situation rolled around. So unlike a lot of farmers who were suddenly without their farmers market outlets or their traditional outlets, we had something in place, and it was already running. It had been going all for years, but all that winter. So when that decision came down from public health and the farmers market board that there would be no market, we just didn't stop doing that winter egg sale, that veg email program. We picked it up on the 1st of May. We rolled it over to a farmers market schedule of Saturday mornings, and we delivered outside. We have great partners with Peachtree Brewing Company in the East Village, and we had been delivering our veggie mail there. They offered us their parking lot, and so we did drive-through produce for that entire year. And again, we were partnering with Ebersol Cattle Company and Lost Lake Farm, as well as Peachtree. And so people could could place their order online for all three of the operations on one order form, and then they would drive through, and we were zero contact, so a bunch of them would make really fun signs. They'd hold their signs up, and we'd have cars backed clear out of the parking lot, and it was the most incredible transition in a really stressful time for a lot of people, and people had so much fun with it. And so they would drive through, they'd hold up their signs, they'd pop their trunks, we'd drop their bags in their vehicles, and away they'd go. Well, after the emergency level of 2020, then 21, markets started opening up again. And we really liked how this had gone with our veggie mail. So we emailed our customer base and said, where do you want to find us? Back in our farmers market booth, or do you want to keep doing veg email? And 85% of our responders came back with veg email. So that for us was a customer-driven choice that made us do celebratory dances on our farm. The idea that we didn't have to be at farmers market, that we could roll over into this program. So we are no longer harvesting everything we can on the farm and taking it to market in hopes that it will sell. Everything is pre-ordered. We custom harvest for those orders. And when people come, we're no longer doing drive-through. They walk inside. They meet each of the vendors who we're all still working with. Each of our vendors, they get their bag, they pay that vendor directly, and off they go. And our numbers have remained very stable. So while 2020 was a crazy banner year and that we will probably never see the likes of, our 2023 income matched our 2019 farmers market income. So we were able to fill that hole and start to grow it a little bit. So for us, this was a landslide of a change that has been really desirable for us. And I hope that the markets never change enough that I am compelled to go back to farmers market at this point. I really appreciate this model. It's been a great thing for us. And Rob, I know you were at farmers markets for a while and also have made some changes.
That's a really great transition because that's true. Yeah, we early on, farmers market was really great for us to begin the business. It was an easy way to begin putting yourself into the market, determining who would be your customers, what would sell, what you're good at growing. Because the nice thing about farmers market is you bring what you have that looks good instead of everything. And if you move to a CSA, you feel compelled to have a little bit of everything throughout the season. So farmers market was a good entry. But for us, what happened is by 2007, our third year, we were doing 4 farmers markets a week, and we had a 40-member CSA to boot. And we would try to do our deliveries at the farmers market in addition to holding the table at the same time. And I think everybody who's done farmers markets knows that the farmers market is not, you don't just work 3 hours when the market's open. You got to do all the harvesting, packing, cleaning. You got to load your truck. You got to get there. You got to set up. You're there for the 3 hours. Then you got to tear it down, bring it back, unload it. And if you do that 4 days of the week, how much time do you have left to do all the other things you're supposed to do as a farmer? And the answer is you don't, or you just don't sleep. I think the turning point for us here was that we had somebody volunteering at the farm, and they said, I saw you at the farmer's market, and you're always so friendly with the people out there. You're always patient with them. You answer questions, you smile. But the moment they turn away, you get this really vacant staring look. And we realized, okay, I think that maybe we are going to burn out at this rate. So we got a very fortuitous call from Roots Market, which was in Cedar Falls at the time, and they invited us to make our CSA deliveries in Cedar Falls for our Cedar Falls customers at their store location. And so we made the decision that we were going to start dropping farmers markets and go all in for the CSA. And we expanded to 120 members, and we added some bulk sales to a few other places, including Roots. And over time, those markets, those farmers markets, we started taking them away, except for the plant sales we did in the spring. But then we stopped coming once the plant sales were done. For a while, we held on to CSA delivery at a Waverly farmers market. And I will tell anybody who is looking at doing CSA deliveries in the same location as their stall at a farmer's market, it's fraught with problems. Among them are the people who don't understand what a CSA is and will get very rabidly upset that they cannot buy one of those farm shares as a drop-in. Because sometimes we'd have produce in the farm share that they weren't seeing on the front table, and they wanted that. So we eventually got all the way out of farmers markets and went all CSA or direct sales. And that's, for us, was not anything that we regret in the least. But I will say that the farmers market was key to getting started. I think that was a really important thing. But we matured past that. And oddly enough, I'm actually considering going back into plant sales and doing a couple weeks of farmers markets again, but I don't know that I've liked not doing it so much that I suspect I will not get enough motivation to do that again. Let's go to another slide here. This might be one of the huge turning points for both farms that is exactly based on the same thing. We traced it back to 2011, I think, successfully. That's the first year that the gang of farms, or gang of 4 then, there were 4 farms, ourselves at Genuine Fox Farm, Bluegate Farm, the Scattergood Friends School Farm, and Grinnell Heritage Farm. We talked to each other during a PFI conference in Marshalltown. For those of you who are like, oh, PFI's always been where it is now. Well, no, it hasn't been. And we were talking about how isolated we were feeling. When we would have a difficult year, it's like, well, it's just you. You can tell your customers you're struggling, or you can even tell your family you're struggling. But if they don't do what you do, they're not going to get it. They're just going to say, oh, we're sorry that you feel bad. But once we got this group of farms together, one of the things we did is we visited each farm. We went to one different farm each month, and we did a project, and then we had food. We shared food together. And we all committed to do it. I mean, we did not allow ourselves to just say, oh, I feel tired, I'm not going. We all committed to do it. And this was one of the best investments that we made for our farm, was finding our peers. And all of us started roughly in the same time period. So we had similar experiences. We were finding some similar issues that we were navigating, so we could share our solutions. And what's odd about this is, as Jill's saying things, I'm like, Well, actually, we made that decision because Jill made this decision before us. So we said that's a good idea. And then we modified it to fit our farm. So this group was probably one of the most valuable pivot points for our farm. During that critical 5 through 7 year period where so many, we were so tempted to quit, and yet we got a high tunnel in 2010. This group started in 2011, and here we are. Jill, what do you think about that gang thing?
Yeah, for us, it came at a really important time, and we didn't realize how important it was going to be. When we first gathered in 2011, gosh, it was hard to look ahead at your week and go, oh my gosh, we have to take an entire day off, leave the farm, and go work on somebody else's farm. And it was hard to mentally wrap your brain around in the heat of the growing season that you were going to do that. It was worth it every single time, regardless of whether we were going or we were hosting. These, for us, these were farmers that we were impressed by. I mean, they were our peers, but these were people whose opinions we valued. And it was a little scary and pretty humbling that first time you invited the group to your farm to see the things that we wanted to get done were the things that we hadn't gotten done, and they weren't necessarily the things we were proudest of. So, the field you lost control of, or something you hadn't gotten cleaned up. And there was no judgment within this group, at least no serious judgment. There was a lot of joking and joshing, but these were people who had the same goals and values that we did, and a lot of shared experience, but different perspectives on that experience. And we were about to find how valuable they were, because when 2012 hit us, and it hit us incredibly hard, like I mentioned earlier, Sean was in the hospital at the time, and I got a text message, I think it was from Melissa Dunham, who said, the gang is coming to your farm this Saturday, and you can leave us a list of what you want done or not. We'll figure it out. You don't have to be there, but we're coming. So if there's something specific you want us to work on, leave a note. And I was so exhausted and devastated and overwhelmed and scrambling at that point that I couldn't even think straight. And this group of farmers, plus a couple supplemental people they brought with them, came to our farm, and in one day, they weeded and cultivated our entire vegetable operation. Now, I had employees at that point, but I was spending so much time running back and forth between the farm and the hospital that I wasn't managing well. My employees weren't particularly experienced. The idea that this group of people would come in and catch us up was awe-inspiring. And through the years, we were able to do some level of service like that for every farm in our group, whether it was an on-farm issue or an off-farm issue. This group became our extended farm family, and the level of sharing and expertise, if I want to know I'm struggling with a variety of something, or a variety gets dropped, these are the people I call and say, hey, Rob, what are you growing for early broccoli? And we're in different geographical parts of the state, so that exact data doesn't always translate, but the experience and the perspective does. And it's just been one of the largest outside influences on our farm. We ordered supplies together to get some benefit there. Even though a couple of the farms that were originally around are no longer here present, we still maintain that relationship with them. And something that we've done is every winter, we all get together for a weekend retreat. And sometimes we host, sometimes it was hosted at Grinnell, but we get together, we eat. As you can see from this picture, we always eat together. And it gives us time to actually have our own little mini informal conference. Every farm gets a chance, a couple of hours to speak about whatever they want to speak about. We all reflect on it. Sometimes we get a little mouthy. Usually that's just Rob, but you know, this this is a huge part of our farm, and finding your community and being able to have people within your both your social circle and your professional circle that you can depend on for casual questions or sometimes life-saving and farm-saving events. I just can't speak highly enough. So this has been and continues to be a huge part of our farm.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to move on from that topic. I mean, we even did a whole session at PFI on it, and I don't think that was long enough. But
Right.
in any event, we probably should move on. I see we've got about we don't have a whole lot of time left, so we'll run through a few real quick. So Jill, you added some new ground relatively recently to your farm, and that was a big pivot point.
We did. So in 2011, we started renting ground from a family member that hadn't been in our uh, control previous to that. And our ground is a little complicated. We are in hilly southern Iowa, so we roll both directions. All of our previous gardening space falls off to the east, west, north, and south. So we do a huge amount of erosion control, and all of our earlier beds were in permanent beds, which is interesting and complicating in a lot of ways. This new ground that opened up is relatively flat, which was a whole new experience for us. And it allowed us to change how we planted, our mechanization level. It's better soil than we were previously working on improving. So it gave us a different baseline. And the first year we were in here, the gang all came out and helped us weed all the annual grasses out of it. And it was overwhelming. But this really changed a lot of our processes on the farm as far as our crop processes. And so this was a pretty big change for us.
Yeah, I thought it was a huge change and a welcome change for your farm when that happened. In our case, most of our adding new ground happened in the first 3 years. We started just with maybe 2/3 of an acre the first year of vegetables, and then it went to 2, and then it went to 5, and then we kind of changed what we used for ground. So in our case, it was just an early. That's when we decided to ramp up, and that we're going to do more than like a local. Here's a card table with produce. I hope I get $10 for it. That was kind of the difference there. And I just hit something. There we go. So ours was fairly early. Another thing that was really big, and I think I'll just cover this one real quick, is the pesticide drift thing. There's a reason I work for Pesticide Action Network, and part of that has to do with a major event in 2012 where we had a plane fly over and basically drench myself, some of our poultry, half of our farm with pesticides. And I think Jill and I both agree that one of the big things there is it changed a lot of how we prepare mentally, especially for the spraying seasons around us. In Jill's case, you've got a lot more land, maybe a lot more buffer. So you were thinking, well, this is probably not going to ever affect me. In our farm's case, we have ground that runs pretty much right up to our farm. We're surrounded by corn and soybeans. And probably when we started, we should have been thinking even harder than we did about the likelihood that there would be drift of some kind. But it certainly made a difference. I think we're looking at a bucket of produce you had to get rid of there. Is that what I'm seeing on the left?
Yeah. We lost about 60% of our crops in 2007. And so skid loader buckets and buckets and buckets that had to be disposed of.
And we don't want to dwell on that too much. We probably would rather dwell on things like pieces of equipment that made a huge difference on your farm.
They're way more fun to talk about. So when that new ground opened up for us, as I said, it changed a lot of our process, and we were able to add much more mechanization to our handling, and do some adapting. To that point, we'd always hand planted and hand harvested all of our potatoes. And when our new ground opened up, we were able to expand that ground, but only because we were able to add some mechanization. So in that season, the previous year we had acquired the Knowles transplanter, and I had a eureka moment that, oh, I bet we could use that to plant potatoes. So putting in that volume of potatoes, and then we also acquired an old-fashioned potato plow, an old John Deere potato plow. All of those things so changed the baseline of what we were capable of doing. And it was a big mental change to go from thinking about things on a BCS scale to, you know, our tractor driven tiller and utilizing that kind of equipment. We certainly learned some new skills, but it has improved our produce and our quality of life both. And I suspect you'd say the same thing, Rob.
Yeah, I would say exactly the same. There's two examples right here on the screen. One is we actually went out and eventually got ourselves a new tractor as opposed to running with an old tractor that ran half the time. I'm not a mechanic, so of course that was part of the issue, is I wasn't prone to being a good mechanic. But one of the really cool things I thought I'd point out is we have this neat bin. It's an old auger bin, and basically we had a person that we knew that converted it to a portable bin, so when we needed feed for our poultry, we could hook it up, take it down, they could load up the feed, I could bring it back, and it's got a chute in the back where I can get the feed out fairly simply each day. And for somebody who was raising several hundred broilers each year and had a flock of 100 hens and raised 75 turkeys, feed management was a big thing. And it was really hard to do when you use trash cans. Imagine how many trash cans and having to move them around, how that would be. So sometimes you just have to look at those points where your farm is struggling, and then go ahead and make that investment and move forward. And you rarely look back when you make those changes. So I'm going to skip over these, and I think I'm just going to go right to the end, and we can just take some questions.
Thank you, Rob and Jill. It's really great, especially the building the community part. If you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat real quick. We'll give everyone a few minutes. If you don't know, the chat is on the bottom of your screen. All you have to do is hit it, and a little message box will pop up, and you'll be able to type in any questions that you may have.
We've been doing such a good job, Jill. Nobody has questions.
Right.
Very thorough.
Right. You know, I wanted to back up to something that Rob mentioned it briefly, and I want to emphasize it a little bit. PFI was the impetus for our Gang of Four and then Gang of Five farm. That group of farmers, we met at a PFI conference. The idea was born at a PFI conference, and without PFI, we never would have made that connection. So while PFI talks about networking being such a big part of their goal and the annual conference, it really has made a daily difference on our farm, and especially with this group.
All right, we do have one question for Jill. Do you use your potato planter for any other planting applications?
I'm embarrassed to say currently no. We're missing a creep gear on our tractor, and we're not fast enough to be able to use the transplanter for anything but potatoes currently. So the embarrassing answer for that right now is no.
It's actually not an embarrassing answer in a way. It's just a reminder that everything is in transition pretty much. I think that's something we both learned, is that farms are always in transition. And I think when I started, I thought you would have a certain number of years of experience, and then you would get it all set up and you just do that every year and it would be fine. And I was in error. That's not what it is. Your farm is always in transition, so you're always looking at pivot points. Some big, some small.
Yep, I agree.
All right. I'm assuming this is directed to both of you. what is on your list for 2024 and beyond?
Wow.
I would guess maybe like upcoming enterprises or new goals.
One of the things that we are looking at is, it was a slide that we kind of skipped over for time, what things we're retiring. So we are looking at growing things with more skill and more efficiency, and so having less ground under cultivation to still meet our production goals. So we are ditching the large part of our winter squash crops because they are not successful for us historically. So something we've gotten is the maturity to look at a crop and say, nope, not going to do it this year. We're done. So we are looking forward to not growing squash and taking up that space in expanding our dahlia crops for us.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of interesting because that's similar to some of, and some of ours is born by the fact that we don't have the labor anymore. So we had to make some choices. But again, I'll tell you, a real good way for you to decide I'm not growing that anymore is to take away the labor. And now suddenly you're looking at, well, what things do I consistently do really well with? And unlike Jill's farm, we do really well with winter squash. We're very good at it. And here's the other neat thing. If you grow certain varieties of winter squash, you can sell a bunch of it, but you can sell some of it in bulk, but you can also donate it to the food bank. And the food bank is really pleased because it's something most people know what to do with it. And then the other cool thing about it is that it's a one and done, is what I call it. It's a one harvest and you're done with the crop. If you don't have much labor, it's harder to do things like green beans where you pick them multiple times, or tomatoes. Like cherry tomatoes is practically a no-go. So we have like 2 cherry tomato plants because Tammy loves them. And if she eats them, she eats them. If she doesn't, she doesn't. And that's fine. But those are some things. It's just picking the crops and saying no to things. In fact, we said no to somebody asked us specifically, will you grow Brussels sprouts for us? And I said, no, thank you. I've never liked growing them. They've never done particularly well on our farm. And on the other hand, other things have. So yeah, that's a really important
one. Thank you, Rob. Here's a good one. Where do you find joy in farming? And how does this relate to your relative longevity as vegetable growers in Iowa?
Do you want me to go first, or you want to go first on this one?
I was just listening to you snicker about it. I just mentioned it, so I'm willing to. Currently, dahlias are something that is giving me a great amount of joy. We do have a flower enterprise on the farm that's fairly new, and I found as I looked at that crop all last year, it was something that I was drawn towards and gave me joy every single day. So every single day until it was time to dig them. So that's an enterprise that we are putting more energy into this season and pulling back on some things that don't give us joy. So for me, I would say that's a very specific thing. And the fact that just last week we started seeds, and as much as it means we're getting on a bus that we won't get off until the end of December, I'm always pretty excited to start seeds in the spring.
I appreciate that Mark Quee is asking this question. And it, for those who don't know Mark, this is part of the reason we love Mark. As far as I'm concerned, I am more appreciative of the wild spaces on my farm, and the flowers again. So one of the things that we are doing more this year is we're going to make sure we plant more flowers because we like them. And the fact that I can go out and I can see a bull snake surfing on the broccoli plants, that a tiger swallowtail will land on the clover next to me. Those are the things that bring me joy in farming. The farming makes me be outside, makes me be present. And if I provide habitat for those things that make me happy, that brings me joy, So now I have the opportunity to witness it. And that's one of the big reasons. The other big reason is people like Mark Quee and Jill Beebout.
Yeah, I was going to say this, just build on that a little more. Mark is also part of our gang of 4 farms, and part of that foundational social bulwark for our farm, and that gives us joy all the time.
Thank you. All right. We have time for a couple more. So if you do have a question, you go ahead and type it in the chat. Give everyone just a moment.
We actually had a whole host of little things that made big differences too. Little things like running our vegetable rows the long way instead of the short way in a field made a big difference because you turn around less often with your equipment. There's just a whole host of little things that can surprise you with their impact, but I think we were talking about bigger pivot points most of the time, and I think that was a good way to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions popping up in the chat. So thank you so much, Mark and Jill, for joining us today. It's always great to hear from both of you.
Thanks very much. It was great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. For everyone else, when you sign off, there is going to be a survey, and we would love it if you take the time to fill that out for us.